When my son breathed his last, his wife inherited his beautiful house and a staggering $25 million. Her first act was to show me the door, her words cutting deeper than any knife. "You're not welcome in this house anymore. Go find a ditch to disappear in." But only a short while later, the family lawyer chuckled and posed a simple question. "Did you truly listen to the reading of the will?" As it turned out, a clause hidden within that document was enough to make my daughter-in-law faint dead away from the shock. The cherrywood casket gleamed under a heavy gray Ohio sky, which had been threatening a downpour that stubbornly held back. A somber crowd of 37 people gathered around my son Arthur's grave, their dark attire making them look like a flock of crows scattered across the vibrant spring grass. In my tired, wrinkled hands, I clutched a school photograph of Arthur from the 4th grade, its edges worn soft from a lifetime of being cherished. My boy was gone. He was only 45, and the cancer had taken him from me. Miranda, his wife, had positioned herself right at the head of the casket, delivering a flawless performance of the heartbroken widow. The designer dress she wore, a stark, fashionable black, likely cost more than what most of the people gathered there earned in a whole month. Her perfectly manicured nails, painted a deep blood red, rested on the polished wood as if she already owned it, as if she owned everything he had ever touched. The pastor was in the middle of his sermon on eternal peace when she made her move. The sharp click of her high heels on the cemetery's stone path echoed as she approached me, her face a mask of calculated sympathy. "Eleanor," she whispered, just loud enough for Mrs. Gable and the Peterson family to overhear. Her manicured hand, cool to the touch, landed on my arm. "I do hope you understand that you won't be able to continue living in my house after today." Her words felt like a splash of icy water. A few of the mourners nearby shifted on their feet, their discomfort palpable as they pretended not to have heard. But they had. Of course, they had. I held onto Arthur's picture a little tighter, the muscles in my jaw clenching. "This is my son's home, Miranda." "It was your son's home?" she corrected, her voice laced with that sweet poison she had mastered so well. "Now, it's mine." Arthur left every last thing to his loving wife. Behind her gloved hand, Mrs. Gable let out a soft, scandalized gasp. Beatrice Smith, my dearest friend, took a step closer, her kind face hardening with concern. These were the people who had known Arthur since he was a little boy, barely tall enough to see over a picket fence. They had watched him build his construction empire from the ground up, with nothing but grit and determination. "We haven't heard the will read yet," I said, my voice quiet but steady, betraying none of the fire that was beginning to rage inside my chest. Miranda laughed. An actual, jarring laugh. Right there at my son's funeral. "What's there to hear? I'm his wife. Who else would he leave his millions to?" The pastor paused his sermon, looking deeply uneasy. People were now openly staring, while others looked away, their faces flushed with second-hand embarrassment. This day was meant to be about Arthur, about celebrating the man he was. Instead, this woman was transforming it into her own personal stage. "The departed was a generous soul," the pastor continued, desperately trying to steer the service back on course. "A true pillar of our community a pillar who knew how to provide for his family," Miranda cut in, her cold blue eyes locking onto mine with a chilling smile. "His real family." It was in that moment that I understood completely. This wasn't grief speaking. It wasn't even simple greed. This was a calculated strategy. She had planned this very moment, deliberately choosing this public venue, where I would be unable to react as my heart screamed at me to, a place where she could solidify her version of the story in front of a captive audience. The pastor concluded his prayer, just as the first shovelfuls of dirt began to fall upon Arthur's casket. Each thud felt like another piece of my heart breaking away. But it was Miranda's smirk, that small, triumphant curl of her lips as she watched my face that burned itself into my memory. She seamlessly slipped back into her role as the grieving widow, graciously accepting condolences from people who had known Arthur since he was a boy. She played her part to perfection, while my real, gut-wrenching grief was cast aside, as disposable as yesterday's news. As they lowered my boy into the Ohio soil, I made a silent vow to myself. Whatever twisted game Miranda believed she was orchestrating, she had chosen the wrong person to play against. The rain finally began to fall as the last shovel of earth landed. As the crowd began to scatter towards their cars, I remained behind. The gravediggers had completed their somber task, and Arthur's temporary grave marker stood slightly askew in the freshly turned soil. I placed a single white rose on the mound, the same variety my late husband had cultivated in our garden 40 years ago. Miranda's laughter drifted from across the cemetery, where she was holding court with a small group of mourners, no doubt spinning a tragic tale about the heavy burdens of a poor young widow. The wind whipped at my gray hair, and the familiar ache of arthritis pulsed through my hands as I stared down at that old-school photograph. Arthur at 9 years old, a gap-toothed smile lighting up his face, and a stubborn cowlick that refused to be tamed. When did that bright-eyed little boy transform into the hollow-cheeked man I had visited in that Cincinnati hospital room? It was March of 2023. At the Cleveland Clinic, the sterile, antiseptic smell of the place could never quite mask the scent of fear that lingered in the air. Arthur had lost 40 pounds by then, his expensive suits hanging limply on his wasting frame. The experimental treatments were failing, but he never stopped fighting. He was always a fighter. "Mom, I need you to know that I've taken care of you," he had told me one day, his hand gripping mine, his fingers feeling as fragile as a bird's bones. "No matter what happens, you'll be protected." I hadn't grasped his full meaning then. I assumed he was talking about a life insurance policy, or perhaps a savings account he'd set aside. Arthur had always been the responsible one, even as a child, meticulously saving his pennies in old jam jars. But as I watched him endure those agonizing final months, I saw something else in his eyes. Fear. It wasn't a fear of dying. Arthur was afraid of very little. It was a fear of leaving things unresolved, of leaving the people he loved vulnerable. My mind drifted back 20 years. I saw Arthur at 25, standing in what would soon be his first office. It was a small, rented room above Miller's hardware store, furnished with nothing more than a folding table and dreams that were bigger than the entire state of Ohio. "I'll never be poor like we were, Mom," he had vowed, his eyes burning with ambition. He worked 16-hour days, turning a modest $5,000 loan into something real and substantial. He built subdivisions that spanned 3 counties, creating jobs and building beautiful homes for happy families. Success, when it finally came, arrived swiftly. He made his first million by 35, and 10 million by the time he was 40. But the relentless pace never slowed. Arthur drove himself like a man possessed, chasing after something I never fully comprehended. Perhaps he was trying to outrun the memories of food stamps and second-hand clothes, of watching his father count out pennies at the grocery store checkout. The photograph trembled in my arthritic hands. I remembered our last truly coherent conversation. It was in February, just 3 days before the end. Arthur's voice was barely a whisper, but his words were sharp, filled with a desperate urgency. "She's not who I thought she was, Mom. Miranda." I figured it out too late. "Son, you're exhausted. It's the medication, the will," he had insisted. "I made sure you're protected. Promise me you'll fight, Mom, if you have to." I had promised, though I didn't understand what I was promising to do. I chalked it up to the powerful drugs, the pain making him paranoid. Arthur passed away believing that I understood his final wishes, and I had failed to grasp their importance in that last, precious moment. Now, standing here over his grave while his wife celebrated her newfound wealth just 50 yards away, his words felt less like paranoia and more like a chilling prophecy. All the money in the world hadn't been able to save him. All those years spent building an empire, sacrificing his health, his time, and his peace of mind, and the cancer had claimed him anyway. The cruel, bitter irony of it all stung more than Miranda's threats. But Arthur had been clever. Far more clever than his old mother had ever given him credit for. In those final months, while he was fighting for his own life, he had also been fighting for mine. I carefully tucked the photograph back into my coat pocket as Miranda's voice, sharp and clear, carried across the cemetery. "Well, it's time we discussed practical matters." She was approaching me again, her hand-picked group of witnesses in tow, no doubt gearing up for another public performance of my humiliation. My hand tightened around the school photo in my pocket, the soft, worn edges pressing into my palm. Whatever Arthur had arranged, whatever protection he had promised me, I had a feeling I was going to need it very, very soon. The rain was falling harder now, and Miranda's designer shoes were surely getting caked in mud. Good. Let her struggle with something, even if it was just walking across the wet grass. The gravel crunched under the tires of my old station wagon as I walked toward it. Car doors were slamming all around the parking area, engines turning over as people rushed to escape. The suffocating awkwardness Miranda had orchestrated at the graveside. She cut me off before I could reach my car, her designer heels clicking sharply on the wet asphalt. Mrs. Gable, Frank from the local bank, and 3 other mourners stood by her side, arranged like a jury she had personally selected. It was strategic positioning. It was a tactic my late husband, who had served in the army, had taught me to recognize, always control the high ground. "Eleanor, you need to face reality," Miranda said, planting herself directly in my path. Those cold blue eyes of hers were locked onto mine. Arthur left everything to me. The house, the business, the investments, every single penny. Her confidence was absolute. Chillingly so. This wasn't a bluff or some hopeful fantasy. She knew something the rest of us didn't. And she was relishing the power of the reveal. I kept my voice calm and even, the same tone I used to use to soothe a frightened child. "We haven't heard the will yet, Miranda." "What's to hear?" Her laugh was so sharp it could have shattered glass. "I'm his wife." Did you honestly think he'd leave millions to someone who never contributed a single dime to his success? The witnesses she had gathered shifted uncomfortably. Frank cleared his throat and became intensely interested in the tips of his shoes. Mrs. Gable clutched her purse with white knuckles, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. But they all stayed. That was the entire purpose of her little piece of theater, to create witnesses to her victory, to establish her narrative before anyone had a chance to question it. "I know this must be difficult," she went on, tilting her head with a practiced air of sympathy. "But you simply cannot live in denial. Arthur loved you, of course, but he was a practical man. He knew that I would need everything to maintain the lifestyle he worked so hard to build for us." The cruelty was astonishing. It wasn't just her words, but the timing, the public stage, the audience she had assembled to witness my humiliation. This woman had studied the art of inflicting pain the way other people study cooking. "Is everything all right over here, Eleanor?" Beatrice Smith approached from her old sedan, her brow furrowed with concern. She could read the tension in the air like a farmer reads the sky for signs of a coming storm. At 67, Bea was still as sturdy as the oak trees on her family farm, with hands that could calm a spooked horse or stand up to any bully. 30 years of friendship had given her a keen sense for trouble, and Miranda was trouble wrapped in a designer dress. "We're just discussing practical matters," Miranda said, her irritation at being interrupted flashing across her face before her mask of composure slipped back into place. "Practical matters can wait," Bea said quietly, subtly positioning herself between Miranda and me. "A woman deserves a moment to grieve for her son." "Of course she does." Miranda's smile was as thin as a razor's edge. "That's precisely why I'm inviting everyone back to the house for some refreshments. A proper memorial gathering." This was the first I'd heard of it. Arthur would have wanted something simple and quiet. But here was Miranda, rewriting his final chapter in real time, casting herself as the generous, thoughtful hostess instead of the vultures circling his estate. "Oh, that sounds lovely," Mrs. Gable said, clearly relieved to have a normal social obligation to focus on. Arthur would have appreciated that. The others murmured their agreement, readily accepting the invitation without a second thought. Miranda's smile widened as she watched them fall in line, solidifying her role as the gracious keeper of Arthur's memory. "You'll come too, won't you, Eleanor?" Her tone was like silk draped over steel. "It's so important for family to be there." The word family was a carefully crafted insult, a barb wrapped in a ribbon of courtesy, delivered in front of people who had known me since before Arthur was even a twinkle in my eye. She was daring me to refuse, to make myself look petty and ungrateful in front of the entire community. "Something's not right about this," Bea murmured, her voice low enough for only me to hear. Her farmer's intuition was sharper than most people gave her credit for. But the other mourners were already heading to their cars, discussing what potluck dishes they could bring, and how much Arthur would have loved seeing everyone together. Miranda had successfully hijacked my son's memory, turning his funeral into her own coronation. "I'll see you at the house," she said, a triumphant gleam in her blue eyes. "After all, it's still your son's house. For now." The emphasis she placed on "for now" was deliberate. Another small, perfectly aimed cruelty. She climbed into Arthur's Mercedes now, and drove off, leading a caravan of mourners to the house that had been my home for the last 3 years. I stood in the rainy cemetery parking lot, the damp chill seeping into my coat, and watched the taillights disappear down the road. The funeral was over, but something else entirely was just beginning. Bea waited by her car, the engine running, but she didn't leave. "You're riding with me, old friend." I took one last look back at Arthur's grave, then climbed into her car. Whatever Miranda had in store for us at this memorial gathering, I was grateful I wouldn't have to face it alone. The 15-minute drive to the house felt like we were heading into a storm, which, in a way, we were. Cars were pulling into the sweeping circular driveway one after another, the gravel crunching under their tires as we arrived at the Wells family home. Miranda had beaten us there, naturally. Her Mercedes was parked in a place of prominence near the front steps. She emerged from the house before most people had even turned off their engines, radiating a sudden, unsettling energy that made my skin crawl. "Please, everyone, come inside. I've prepared a proper memorial gathering for Arthur." Her voice boomed across the driveway with a theatrical projection. I climbed out of Bea's car slowly, my arthritic joints groaning in protest after the long, emotional day. Something felt profoundly wrong about the whole scene. We hadn't planned any kind of gathering. In fact, Arthur would have despised all this fuss. Since when did she plan a memorial? Bea muttered under her breath, matching my slow pace as we walked toward the house. The stately Victorian mansion looked just as it always had. The grand white columns, the wraparound porch, the climbing roses my late husband had planted 4 decades ago. But Miranda stood on those front steps as if she owned every single brick and board which, based on what we had just witnessed, she probably did. Mrs. Gable caught up to us, raising her eyebrows at me. "Eleanor, dear, did you know about this?" "No, ma'am," I replied. "This is all news to me." Miranda overheard us and turned that practiced, perfect smile in our direction. "I just wanted all of Arthur's friends to have a proper chance to remember him. Surely you don't object to honoring your own son's memory?" The way she framed the question made any opposition sound monstrously selfish. She was a clever woman, this daughter-in-law of mine, as manipulative as a traveling con artist, but undeniably clever. We all filed into the house I had called home for 3 years, the house where Arthur had been born, where his father had died, where 3 generations of our family had lived and worked and loved, and now, it belonged to a woman who had known Arthur for less than 2 years. That's when I noticed the setup: tables, draped in crisp white linens I'd never seen before, had been arranged in the formal dining room. The good china was set out, not our everyday dishes, but the wedding set that had belonged to my mother-in-law. Wine glasses sparkled under the crystal chandelier, and several expensive-looking bottles were already uncorked and breathing on a side table. This level of preparation couldn't have possibly happened in the single hour between the funeral and our arrival. "She planned all of this," I whispered to Bea as we hung our damp coats in the front hall. "Days ago, I'd bet," she agreed, her sharp farmer's eyes taking in every single detail. "Look at those floral arrangements. Those didn't come from the grocery store. Someone ordered those well in advance." Miranda swept through the rooms like a hostess who had been born to the role, expertly directing people into the living room, offering them drinks, and discussing the wine selection with an air of authority. Every single gesture, every word, screamed ownership, possession, and absolute control. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," she announced, gesturing towards Arthur's favorite armchair, the worn leather recliner, where he had spent his final months, when the treatments left him too weak to do much else. "I'll bring everyone something to drink." Frank from the bank accepted a glass of red wine that likely cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "This is quite thoughtful of you, Miranda. I can't believe you prepared all this today." "Arthur always said that hospitality was important," she replied, pouring herself a generous glass, her hands as steady as a surgeon's. "He would have wanted his friends to remember this day properly. Remember it properly. As if the funeral itself wasn't enough. As if she needed to stamp her ownership all over Arthur's memory too." The doorbell chimed, cutting through the low murmur of conversation. Miranda's eyes lit up instantly, and she practically skipped to the front door. "That must be Mr. Davies," she announced to the room, her excitement barely contained. "Now we can finally take care of the formal matters." Jasper Davies entered, his official briefcase in hand. His expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes found mine across the room. Something flickered in his gaze, a look I couldn't quite decipher, but it made my pulse quicken. The real event was about to begin. 23 people settled into the living room, perching on sofas, armchairs, and any other available surface. The air grew heavy, thick, with the formal tension of a courtroom. Jasper Davies positioned himself near the fireplace, methodically removing official-looking documents from his leather briefcase. Miranda claimed the wingback chair closest to the lawyer, smoothing her black dress and adjusting a string of pearls at her neck. I found a spot in the corner chair by the window, the same spot where I had sat on countless evenings, watching Arthur work on his laptop. "I will now read the last will and testament of Arthur Michael Wells." "Mr. Davies began, his voice carrying the sober weight of legal authority. The room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the soft rustle of paper. Dated February 10th, 2025. Witnessed and notarized in accordance with Ohio state law. Miranda's foot began to tap an impatient rhythm against the oriental rug. Her fingers drummed a restless beat on the arm of her chair. The woman could hardly contain her anticipation. "Mr. Davies continued, reciting the standard legal boilerplate declarations of a sound mind, the revocation of all previous wills, the appointment of an executor, the kind of tedious details that made Mrs. Kinder's Gable shift in her seat and Frank glance at his watch. To my loyal employees at Wells Construction, I bequeath 1 month's additional salary, to be distributed equally among all current staff members." Mr. Davies read, his voice steady and professional. "To my cousin, Susan, in Columbus, I leave my grandmother's jewelry collection. To the Maple Creek Public Library, I bequeath $50,000 for the renovation of the children's wing. Small bequests, charitable donations, personal mementos distributed among various relatives. It was all standard fare for a will, and it only made Miranda's impatience more glaringly obvious. "When is he going to get to the important parts?" she stage whispered. loud enough for at least half the room to hear. Mr. Davies cleared his throat and turned to a new page. The room seemed to hold a collective breath. To my beloved wife, Miranda Marie Wells. I leave the family home, located at 847 Magnolia Street, along with all its contents, and the sum of $25 million from my investment accounts. Miranda shot up from her chair as if she'd been spring-loaded. I knew it. I knew Arthur would take care of me properly. The reactions from the guests were a mixed bag. Some offered polite, if hesitant, smiles. Others looked deeply uncomfortable with her unrestrained glee. Mrs. Gable exchanged a very pointed look with her husband. Even in grief, there are certain unspoken boundaries of decorum that most people respect. I gripped the arms of my chair, the carved wood grain digging into my palms. $25 million. Plus the house. Arthur had certainly been generous to his wife. I had to give him that. What about? I had to clear my throat, hating that I even had to ask. What do I receive? Mr. Davies' eyes met mine from across the room, and for a fleeting moment, a silent understanding passed between us. A look that said more than words ever could. To my mother, Eleanor Grace Wells, I leave all personal mementos, family photographs, and her late husband's tools from the workshop. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and suffocating. Tools and photographs. After helping Arthur build his empire from the ground up, after 3 years of living under this very roof, after a lifetime of love and sacrifice, tools and photographs. Miranda's smile could have powered the entire county. She turned to face the room like a queen addressing her court, graciously accepting congratulations from neighbors who had known Arthur since he was in diapers. Arthur always promised he would take care of me, she announced, her voice ringing with sheer triumph. He was such a thoughtful husband. Mrs. Gable nodded politely. Well, dear, you're certainly set for life now. More than set. Miranda's laugh had sharp, brittle edges. I'll never have to worry about a single thing ever again. I remained in my chair as she held court, watching her performance with a chilling, newfound clarity. This woman had never loved my son. She had seen a meal ticket, a lifestyle upgrade, a fortune waiting to be inherited. And Arthur, my brilliant, trusting Arthur, had realized it all far too late. But as the congratulations continued, and wine glasses clinked in celebration, Mr. Davies caught my eye one more time. He was packing his documents back into his briefcase, but his movements were slow, deliberate. When our gazes met, he gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod towards the kitchen. There is one additional clause, he said quietly, his words nearly swallowed by the celebratory buzz in the room. But that is a matter that requires a private discussion. Miranda was far too engrossed in soaking up the praise to even notice. But I heard him, and for the first time since the funeral began, a tiny, fragile flicker of something that felt almost like hope stirred in my chest. The formal reading was finished, but it seemed the real business was only just beginning. The guests began to migrate from the living room into the dining area, drawn by the lavish spread Miranda had so mysteriously arranged. Crystal wine glasses caught the evening light that streamed through the tall windows, and the good silver gleamed against the crisp white linens. This was no afternoon afterthought. This was a carefully orchestrated production. Miranda raised her glass high, commanding the room's attention like a conductor before an orchestra. To Arthur, who always took care of those he loved the most. The irony of her toast was not lost on me, even if it sailed right over everyone else's heads. She had just inherited $25 million, while I was left with a box of old tools and some family photos. Arthur's definition of those he loved most apparently had some very interesting criteria. This wine is simply exceptional, commented Dr. Miller, swirling the deep burgundy liquid in his glass. What vintage is this, Miranda? It's a 2012 Bordeaux. Arthur always said that life is too short for cheap wine. She moved through the room with a fluid, confident grace, playing the role of the wealthy hostess as if she'd been born into money. I wanted his friends to remember this day properly. Mrs. Gable accepted a delicate crystal glass, her eyes studying Miranda with a newfound intensity. "And you managed to prepare all of this today? After the funeral and everything? When you truly love someone, you find the strength," Miranda replied, her smile as flawless and practiced as a beauty queen's. Arthur would have wanted his friends to celebrate his life, not just mourn his death. Celebrate was a peculiar choice of words for a funeral reception. Most people refer to these gatherings as memorial services. But Miranda seemed intent on reframing Arthur's death as her own personal victory. "You know," she said, settling onto the velvet sofa next to Mrs. Gable, "I've always wanted to modernize this old place. Maybe open up some of these walls. Update the kitchen." Mrs. Gable's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "But it's such a historic home, dear. It's been in the Wells family for 3 generations. Well, it's my family now." Miranda's laugh tinkled like the sound of shattering glass. "And frankly, all of this dark wood and heavy furniture feels so dreary. I'm thinking of light colors, contemporary furniture. Maybe I'll knock out that wall between the kitchen and the dining room." My knuckles turned white as I gripped my wine glass. This house had been in our family since 1923. My husband's grandfather had built those walls with his own 2 hands, carefully selecting every piece of molding, planning the layout of every room. Arthur had been born in the upstairs bedroom. He had taken his first steps on these very floors. But to Miranda, it was just a collection of dollar signs and design opportunities. Frank from the bank leaned forward, his professional interest piqued. "Will you be staying in Maple Creek long-term, Miranda? Or might you be thinking of relocating?" Miranda's eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. "Actually, I'm seriously considering selling and moving somewhere a bit more cosmopolitan. Maybe Cleveland. Or even New York City." A sudden dead quiet fell over the room. These people had known Arthur his entire life. They had watched him build his business right here in this town, creating jobs for their children, generously supporting local charities. The thought of his family home being sold off to fund Miranda's urban fantasy landed like a slap in the face. "Arthur loved this house," I said quietly. "He was born here." Miranda turned to me with an expression of theatrical surprise, as if she had completely forgotten I was even in the room. "Arthur is dead, Eleanor. It's time to live for the living, don't you think?" The mask slipped off completely in that moment. The grieving widow was gone. The thoughtful hostess had vanished. All that remained was cold, hard calculation wrapped in a designer dress. "Besides," she continued, warming to her subject, "what's the point of keeping a museum when you could have millions in cash? I could travel the world, buy a penthouse apartment, really start living. For the first time in years." Bea stepped closer to me, her weathered face as hard as granite. I could feel her struggling to hold back the words that would surely get us both thrown out. Mrs. Gable began to gather her purse, her discomfort with the turn of the conversation clear on her face. "Well, I really should be getting home. I have an early morning tomorrow." Others quickly followed her lead, murmuring polite excuses and making their way toward the door. Within 20 minutes, Arthur's memorial reception had cleared out like smoke caught in a windstorm. People who had clearly intended to stay for the entire evening suddenly remembered pressing appointments and prior engagements. I remained in my corner chair, watching the mass exodus with a kind of morbid fascination. In a single evening, Miranda had managed to alienate Arthur's entire circle of friends. They had come to honor my son's memory, and instead, they were treated to a front row seat for his widow's avarice. By 8 o'clock, only Bea and I were left. Miranda stood in the now empty dining room, surveying the abandoned wine glasses and half-eaten appetizers with a look of confusion. "Well, I suppose people do have busy lives," she said. But for the first time all day, A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. B squeezed my shoulder as she headed for the door. You call me if you need anything, old friend. And I mean anything. The front door closed with a solid, final thud, leaving Miranda and me alone in the house that had been my home for the last 3 years. She turned to face me with a renewed sense of confidence, clearly relieved to finally drop the public charade. Finally, she said, kicking off her expensive heels. Now, we can discuss your situation properly. The sound of car engines faded into the night, leaving only the steady, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway to break the silence. Miranda moved about the kitchen as if she had lived here her whole life, humming a tune I didn't recognize as she stacked dirty dishes with a practiced, brisk efficiency. Well, that went better than I expected, she said, not even bothering to look at me as she scraped leftover appetizers into the garbage disposal. Her diamond earrings, which likely cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, caught the overhead light and sparkled. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 3 years, and watched her performance with a growing sense of dread. The woman moved with an air of absolute ownership, opening cabinets as if she had memorized their contents, finding the good dish soap without a moment's hesitation. Miranda, we need to talk about what happens now. She didn't turn around, simply continuing to load the dishwasher with a mechanical precision. What happens next? That's quite simple. When she finally did face me, her expression had hardened into something cold and calculating. The grieving widow mask was gone for good, replaced by the face of ruthless business. Next, you pack your belongings and find somewhere else to live. The words landed like physical blows, even though I had been bracing myself for them. This house has been in my family for 3 generations, Miranda. It was in your family, she snapped, punctuating her sentence with a sharp flick of a dish towel. Now it's legally mine. Arthur left me everything. Remember? My hands lay flat on the worn wooden surface of the table, steady despite the fire that was building in my chest. 3 generations of my husband's family had sat at this very table, planning their days, sharing their meals, and raising their children. Arthur told me you'd have trouble accepting reality, she continued, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. He said you'd probably expect to live here forever, like some kind of permanent charity case. My son never said that. Of course, he didn't say it to you. Her laugh was as sharp as breaking glass. He was always too polite to hurt your feelings, but he told me plenty. She pushed off from the counter and began to pace the kitchen floor like a lawyer, making her closing arguments to a jury. He said you had been depending on him for far too long, that it wasn't healthy for a grown woman to need so much support from her son at your age. They were lies. Every single word was a carefully crafted poison, but she delivered them with such unwavering confidence that someone who didn't know Arthur might have actually believed her. Look, I get it. Change is hard for old people. Her tone shifted to one of mock sympathy. But you need to understand something fundamental here. I own this house now. Legally. Completely. The deed, the mortgage, the property taxes, it's all in my name. The deed might have Arthur's name on it, but this land belonged to my husband's grandfather before Arthur was even a thought in this world. And your husband's grandfather didn't leave you anything, did he? She stopped her pacing to stare directly at me. Face the facts, Eleanor. You're a charity case who has outlived her usefulness. The cruelty was breathtaking. But what struck me the most was how much she was enjoying this. This wasn't just about property or money for her. She was savoring my apparent helplessness like it was a glass of fine wine. I want you out of this house by tomorrow morning, she said, her voice rising with every word. And you will take only what you can carry. No furniture, no family heirlooms, nothing that belongs to this house. I stood up slowly, my arthritis making the movement deliberate and measured. Tomorrow morning. And don't even think about trying to claim that anything belonged to your family originally. I have lawyers, Eleanor. Very good ones. They will tie you up in court until you're in the grave. For the first time since Arthur's funeral began, I felt something that could almost be described as a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. As you wish, Miranda. The unexpected calmness in my voice seemed to throw her off balance. She had been building up to a dramatic explosion, clearly expecting me to rage or cry or beg. Instead, all she got was quiet, dignified acceptance. We walked from the kitchen, through the dining room, past the mahogany table where Arthur had done his homework as a little boy, and into the front living room, where generations of family portraits lined the mantelpiece. Miranda followed me with a predatory energy, clearly energized by what she perceived as her complete and utter victory. I have been very patient with you, Eleanor, but my patience is wearing thin. She moved around the room, touching pieces of furniture possessively, the antique sofa, the carved end tables, even the brass lamp that had belonged to Arthur's grandmother. This couch, these antiques, even that ugly family portrait. It's all mine now. Arthur chose every one of those pieces with great care, I said quietly, remembering how he had spent months searching for the perfect coffee table to match the vision his father had for the room. Arthur's taste was just as outdated as yours, she scoffed, her fingers trailing over the surfaces as if she were appraising merchandise for a quick sale. I'm thinking modern minimalist for the redesign. Maybe Scandinavian. Clean lines, light colors, no clutter. She was already erasing his memory, planning to gut the house of everything that connected it to its history, to our family. Here is what's going to happen, she continued, turning to face me with an air of theatrical authority. You will take your clothes, your medications, and you will leave. Nothing else in this house belongs to you. And where exactly do you expect me to go? She shrugged, a gesture both casual and devastatingly cruel. That's not my problem. The senior center, a trailer park, maybe that friend of yours? What's her name? B? Maybe she'll let you sleep in her barn. I'm 65 years old, Miranda. I've lived in this county my entire life. Then you should have planned better for your old age. Her smile was razor sharp. Maybe if you had been a better mother, Arthur would have left you something more substantial than a box of rusty tools. The attack on my relationship with my son cut deeper than anything else she had said. But before I could even formulate a response, she was just getting warmed up. Arthur was a good son. He loved his family. Enough! The word exploded from her with a startling, raw violence. I am so sick of hearing about Arthur and his wonderful family and his precious memories. Her carefully constructed mask didn't just slip, it shattered into a million pieces. He's gone. And you know what? I'm glad. She was shouting now, her perfectly styled hair coming loose, her makeup smudged with a furious energy. Now I can finally live, without having to pretend to care about this boring town and these boring people and these boring family traditions. The confession hung in the air between us, like thick smoke. She had never loved him. She had never loved anything about the life he had built, the community he had served, or the family he had cherished. Get out of my sight, she snarled, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. Go find a gutter to die in where you belong. Instead of the rage she so clearly expected from me, a strange sense of peace settled over me. As you wish, Miranda. Her eyes widened with confusion. What? You're not going to argue? Beg? Make some pathetic speech about family loyalty? No. I allowed myself a small, weary smile. I'll just go collect my things. You're just giving up? She seemed genuinely stunned by my calm acceptance. I'm respecting your wishes. You are, after all, the legal owner of this house. Why are you being so agreeable? She searched for the word. What would be the point in fighting? I started towards the stairs, moving with a deliberate, measured dignity. You've made your position perfectly clear. She remained in the living room, watching me with a mixture of suspicion and confusion. This was not the reaction she had anticipated or desired. Crushing someone is only satisfying if they put up a fight. "I'll need about an hour to pack my essentials," I said from the foot of the stairs. "Take whatever you can fit into 2 suitcases. That's it." "That seems fair." I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling her eyes boring into my back. At the top of the landing, I paused and looked down at her. "Will you be staying up to supervise?" "I'll be right here. Don't try anything clever." I chuckled softly, a sound of genuine amusement. At my age, Miranda? What could I possibly try? As I disappeared down the upstairs hallway, I could hear her pacing restlessly below, the sharp click of her heels echoing on the hardwood floors. She had gotten everything she ever wanted, but something about my reaction was clearly unsettling her. Good. Let her wonder. I left the Wells house at 6 o'clock the next morning, driving my old station wagon with everything I owned in the world packed into 2 battered suitcases. The sun was just beginning to break over the Ohio horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of peach and rose as I pulled into the parking lot of a roadside inn on Route 35. 43 years in that beautiful Victorian mansion, and it had all come down to this. A 12 by 14-foot motel room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale cigarette smoke. The rough polyester bedspread scratched against my hands as I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at my single open suitcase. This was everything I owned now. 3 changes of clothes, my medications, Arthur's 4th grade school photo, and the gold pocket watch that had belonged to my late husband. It wasn't much to show for 65 years of life, but it would have to be enough. 18-wheelers rumbled past on the highway outside, making the thin walls of the motel room tremble. The morning traffic was starting to build, people heading off to their jobs, running errands, living their ordinary, everyday lives, while mine had been completely upended in the span of a single day. "Arthur," I said to his photograph, "I hope you knew this day might come." The motel's coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the small room with the aroma of cheap grounds and hard water. I sat at the tiny Formica table by the window, watching the cars speed past as I methodically took stock of my situation. I was homeless at 65. I had no income other than my Social Security checks. I had no family left, except for a woman who had told me to go die in a gutter. But something was nagging at me, something that had been bothering me since the will reading yesterday. It was the meaningful look Jasper Davies had given me when he mentioned that additional clause. It was the way he had nodded towards the kitchen, while everyone else was celebrating. His professional stoic demeanor had been hiding something that felt almost like anticipation. Arthur had been the smartest man I had ever known. He had built an empire from scratch, outmaneuvered competitors twice his age, and always seemed to be 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Was it really possible that he would leave his own mother completely defenseless against a woman he had grown to deeply distrust? I found Mr. Davies' business card in my wallet and dialed his office number. My hands were steady, a sense of purpose replacing the grief and confusion that had clouded my thoughts. "Davies Legal Services." Jasper speaking. "Jasper, it's Eleanor Wells. I need to speak with you." His tone shifted immediately, professional courtesy replaced by genuine concern. "Eleanor, where are you? I heard that Miranda insisted you leave the house immediately." "She threw me out last night," I said. "Told me to go die on a trash heap, among other things." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "She said what?" "You mentioned an additional clause in Arthur's will yesterday," I said, pressing on. "I think it's time we discussed it." The pause on the line stretched for so long that I thought we might have been disconnected. Then, "Mr. Davies' voice came back, filled with something that sounded remarkably like relief. Yes. It most certainly is time. Can you see me this morning? Can you come to my office? Say, 10 o'clock? I'm at the roadside inn on Route 35. I can be there in 20 minutes. Eleanor. Mr. Davies' voice carried a weight I couldn't quite place. Bring everything Miranda said to you last night. Every cruel word. Every threat. Every insult. Write it all down if you have to. Why? What difference could it possibly make now? Because Arthur anticipated this exact situation. Satisfaction colored his words now. Your son was even smarter than you knew. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? 10 a.m. sharp? He said. And Eleanor? You might want to bring a change of clothes with you back to town. Something nice for when we pay Miranda a visit. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone with the first glimmer of real hope I'd felt since Arthur's diagnosis. Whatever my son had planned, whatever protection he had so carefully woven into his will, it was about to be revealed. I showered, put on my cleanest blouse, and prepared to find out just how well Arthur had known the woman he married. I arrived at Mr. Davies' office at exactly 10 o'clock, parking my old station wagon next to his familiar sedan. Downtown Maple Creek looked just the same as it always did. Brick storefronts, American flags hanging limply in the still morning air, people going about their Tuesday business, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. Mr. Davies' office was on the second floor of the old Merchants Building, its wood-paneled walls lined with law books and framed family photographs. A formal portrait of Arthur hung behind the desk, a shot taken when he had won the county's Business Leader of the Year award 3 years prior. Eleanor, you look exhausted, Mr. Davies said, standing up from his desk, genuine concern etched on his face. How are you holding up at that motel? I've certainly had better accommodations. But I'm managing. I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, noticing how he seemed almost energized. Despite the early hour, you seem almost pleased about something, Jasper. His grin was wider than any I had seen on his face since before Arthur's diagnosis. Eleanor, tell me, did you listen carefully to every single word of the will reading yesterday? What do you mean? Miranda got everything. The house, the money, the business. I got Arthur's old tools and some photographs. That's what everyone thinks they heard, Mr. Davies said, moving to the large office safe in the corner. He spun the combination lock with a practiced efficiency, but sometimes the most important words are the ones people aren't paying attention to. He withdrew a thick manila folder, handling it with the care one might reserve for a precious artifact. Your son was far more clever than Miranda ever imagined. My heart began to beat faster as he laid the complete will out on his desk, the pages spreading out like a roadmap to salvation. Jasper, what aren't you telling me? Arthur knew exactly what kind of person he had married, Davies said, his finger tracing a line down to the bottom of the third page. Look right here. Section 15B. The fine print that everyone missed. I leaned forward, squinting to bring the dense legal text into focus. The words swam before my eyes for a moment. And then, as their meaning became clear, my heart nearly stopped beating. Read it aloud, Eleanor. The house and monetary assets shall transfer to my wife, Miranda Marie Wells. I paused, taking a breath as I processed the next phrase. On the condition that she provides proper care and dignified housing for my mother, Eleanor Grace Wells, until the time of her natural death. The room was utterly silent, save for the soft ticking of Mr. Davies' desk clock. Keep reading, he urged quietly. Should this condition be violated through eviction, verbal abuse, or a failure to provide respectful treatment, the entire inheritance shall immediately and irrevocably revert to the Arthur Wells Cancer Research Foundation. My hands were shaking now. Jasper, she threw me out. She told me to go die on a trash heap. I know she did. His satisfaction was unmistakable. Because Arthur anticipated this exact scenario. How could you possibly know what she said to me? Because your son instructed me to monitor the situation very closely. He told me, "My mom is going to need protection, and I won't be there to give it to her." Mr. Davies pulled out another document, a legal definition sheet. The will specifically defines proper care as dignified housing, respectful treatment, and family consideration. Miranda violated all three of those conditions within 36 hours of the funeral. Tears began to well up in my eyes, a mixture of grief, relief, and an overwhelming sense of pride in my son's foresight and wisdom. He knew. He knew she would do this to me. "He loved you more than his own comfort, Eleanor," he said to me. "My mom deserves better than I can give her while I'm fighting this cancer. But I can damn well make sure she gets what she needs after I'm gone." The sheer magnitude of it all hit me like a physical blow. While he had been fighting for his own life, my sweet Arthur had also been fighting for mine. He had seen through Miranda's charade, anticipated her cruelty, and built a legal fortress around me to protect me. "What happens now?" I asked, dabbing at my eyes with the handkerchief I had carried for 40 years. Mr. Davies was already gathering official papers, stamping documents with his notary seal. "Now, we inform Mrs. Wells of her current legal situation. The inheritance is null and void, as of last night." "When do we tell her?" "This afternoon. Are you ready to face her again?" I straightened my shoulders, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in days returning to me. Arthur's love was still protecting me, still fighting for me, even from beyond the grave. More ready than I've been since this whole nightmare started. Mr. Davies and I spent the lunch hour preparing copies of the complete will and the necessary legal transfer documents. By 3 o'clock, we were driving towards the Wells family home in his sedan, the official papers organized in neat manila folders on the back seat. The Victorian house looked different to me now, as we pulled into the circular driveway. Perhaps it was because I now knew that it didn't really belong to Miranda. It had never truly belonged to her, despite what yesterday's abbreviated will reading had led everyone to believe. Miss Davies rang the doorbell while I stood slightly behind him, holding the folder of documents. The sharp click of heels on the hardwood floor announced Miranda's approach. "I'm not expecting anyone," she called out through the door. When it swung open, she was dressed in casual clothes designer jeans and a silk blouse with her hair up in rollers, as if she were preparing for a night out. The sight of me standing on what she now considered her doorstep immediately ignited her fury. "What are you doing here? I told you never to come back to this house." "Miranda, we brought you something interesting," I said calmly. Mr. Davies stepped forward with an air of professional authority. "Mrs. Wells, we need to discuss your husband's will. There appear to be some aspects you may have overlooked. The will was read yesterday. Everything is settled. You are both trespassing on my property. Actually, ma'am, you may want to review the complete document before you make that claim," Mr. Davies said, extending the official copy towards her. It was multiple pages long, printed on legal letterhead, and adorned with raised seals clearly authentic. She snatched it from his hand suspiciously. "What is this supposed to be?" "The full version of Arthur's last will and testament," I replied. "Not the abbreviated reading you heard yesterday." Miranda scanned the first 2 pages, her eyes recognizing the familiar text about the charitable donations and personal items. Her confusion mounted as she found that everything matched her memory. "This looks exactly the same as what you read before." "Keep reading," Mr. Davies said quietly. "Page 3, Section 15B. I watched her face carefully as she found the section. I watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief, and then to something that bordered on pure panic. Her hands began to tremble as she read Arthur's protection clause. "This is fake," she screamed, the words flying from her mouth. "This clause wasn't in the original will. You didn't listen to the complete reading yesterday," I said. "You were far too busy planning your celebration. You forged this. You added this section after Arthur died." Mr. Davies' voice remained professionally calm. "Ma'am, I can assure you that this document is completely authentic. The original is in my office, safe, witnessed and notarized in accordance with Ohio state law. I want to see the original. This is fraud. This is impossible. She examined every page frantically, searching for any sign of tampering, any alteration, anything at all, to support her desperate claims. But Mr. Davies was meticulous. Every seal was authentic. Every signature was verified. Every legal detail was perfect. Proper care and housing for my mother, she read aloud, her voice dropping to a whisper as the devastating reality began to sink in. You violated that condition approximately 36 hours ago, Mr. Davies informed her. When you evicted Mrs. Wells from this property and told her, and I quote, to die on a trash heap. This can't be legal. There must be some kind of mistake, some loophole. I stepped forward, feeling Arthur's presence beside me like a warm hand on my shoulder. There's no mistake, Miranda. My son knew exactly who you were. She looked back and forth between Mr. Davies and me, and the final, crushing understanding finally dawned in her cold blue eyes. The calculation, the planning, the legal trap, it had all been laid months before Arthur had even passed away. He planned this, she whispered, her voice filled with a horrified awe. He actually planned this whole thing. Perhaps we should discuss the legal implications inside, Mr. Davies suggested. This is a neighborhood after all. Miranda nodded mechanically, stepping back from the doorway. Yes, come in. As we crossed the threshold into the house that had been my home for 3 years, I couldn't help but observe how quickly the power dynamic had shifted. Yesterday, Miranda had been the triumphant property owner. Today, she was about to learn that ownership was a far more complicated concept than she had ever imagined. We gathered in the same living room where the will had been read just the day before. But the atmosphere now felt entirely different. Miranda collapsed into the wingback chair she had claimed as her throne, while Mr. Davies and I took our positions near Arthur's photograph on the mantelpiece. Mrs. Wells, according to Section 15B of your late husband's will, you have officially violated the conditions of your inheritance. Mr. Section 15B of your late husband's will. Davies' voice carried the heavy weight of legal finality. As a result, the entire estate, the house, and all monetary assets now transfers to the Arthur Wells Cancer Research Foundation. This can't be happening. Miranda's voice was barely a whisper, her hands covering her face. This can't actually be happening. By evicting Mrs. Wells and telling her to die on a trash heap, you have nullified your claim to the inheritance. The will specifically requires dignified treatment and respectful housing. But I didn't mean it literally. It was just, I was angry. People say things they don't mean when they're angry. Mr. Davies consulted his legal notes. The document specifies that verbal abuse constitutes grounds for inheritance forfeiture. Your intent is irrelevant under Ohio state law. I settled into Arthur's favorite recliner, the worn leather chair where he had spent his final months, too weak from his treatments to work. The irony was not lost on me. Yesterday, I had been homeless. Today, I was home. Now, we need to discuss living arrangements, I said quietly. Miranda looked up, her despair mixed with confusion. What do you mean? This is still the Wells family home. It always was. I gestured towards the family portraits that lined the mantelpiece. The foundation has graciously agreed to let me remain here as the permanent resident. Mr. Davies nodded in confirmation. Mrs. Wells has been granted lifetime residency rights as part of the inheritance transfer. You can stay too, Miranda, I added. But you'll stay under my rules now. What? What kind of rules? Her voice was small, defeated. Respect. Basic human decency. And a promise to never again suggest that anyone should go die on a trash heap. The same courtesy I would have shown you. What if I apologize? Desperation was creeping into her voice. What if I take back everything I said? The legal violation has already occurred, Mr. Davies explained patiently. The inheritance transfer is irreversible. Under the terms of the will, I leaned forward, studying the woman who had tried to destroy me less than 48 hours ago. Arthur knew this day would come. He protected both of us. Both of us? You get a roof over your head and your dignity. I get the same. I touched Arthur's photograph gently. The foundation will provide a living stipend for both residents. My son was wiser than either of us realized. I lost everything. Miranda's whisper was broken, defeated. Everything I planned for, everything I dreamed of. You lost everything you tried to steal. I corrected her softly. There's a difference. Mr. Davies packed his documents away with an efficient, professional satisfaction. I'll file the transfer papers tomorrow morning. The foundation will assume legal ownership by Friday. Arthur gave me something far more valuable than money, I said, straightening my son's photograph on the side table. Miranda looked up. What is that supposed to mean? Justice, I said, my voice catching slightly. And the knowledge that he truly loved me, he told me in the hospital. Mom, I took care of you. I didn't understand what he meant then. Your son spent months crafting this protection, Mr. Davies added. He anticipated exactly what might happen and built legal safeguards around you. As Mr. Davies prepared to leave, I felt a deep, profound sense of completion. Arthur's love had transcended death itself, reaching forward through a legal document to shield me when I needed him the most. Miranda, you can stay here for as long as you follow the house rules, I said as Mr. Davies gathered his briefcase. Treat people with respect. Contribute to the household peacefully. And remember that this is a home, not a hotel. She nodded numbly. What choice do I have? The same choice you gave me 2 days ago, I replied. But I'm not you. Mr. Davies shook my hand at the front door. Justice has been served, Eleanor. Arthur would be proud. As his car pulled away, I returned to the living room, where Miranda sat staring blankly at the wall. For the first time since Arthur's death, we were alone together, as equals, 2 people dependent on the same charity, living under the same roof, bound together by circumstances that neither of us could change. We will find a way to live together respectfully, I said. I'm sorry, she whispered. About what I said. About everything. Sorry is a start. Respect is what will matter going forward. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 o'clock, marking time in a house that now belonged to neither of us, and yet, to both of us. Arthur's final gift wasn't just justice, it was the possibility of redemption, even for those who might not deserve it. Outside, the warm Ohio afternoon light streamed through the windows my late husband had chosen so many years ago, illuminating the family photographs that would remain on these walls long after Miranda and I were both gone. The Wells family home would endure, protected by a love that had reached beyond the grave. Some victories, I realized, are worth waiting for.